morning and welcome to Deep Dive with Dr. Tracy. I am your host, Dr. Tracy Pearson. It's great to have you here. So, how is your week going? Do you feel healthy? Calm? Like everything is under control and we are all going to be okay? Me neither. No, I'm not feeling it. I hope in some parallel universe somewhere, we are all living our best lives. That I'm going out to dinner with my partner every week, that I'm visiting all these great places in Los Angeles, California that we have, that I am flying on airplanes to exciting places, and the only thing I need to do when I go to the airport is make sure that my suitcase is under the maximum weight allowed. That in a parallel universe, we became aware of COVID, and that when we did, we had a competent leader that followed the carefully crafted plan for how to deal with a global pandemic that the last administration shared with them, and that we were able to contain this thing before it decimated our country and turned our lives upside down. We have an interesting show for you tonight. If you've watched the Power Hour Talk Panel show on Tuesday night, and if you didn't, I'm going to let you off this week, but next week, I expect that you're going to watch. Well, if you watched the show, I shared that we were going to be talking about transgender athletes in competition. And we are going to do that, but not tonight. The news gods dumped some headlines on my desk, and I decided that we needed to address some of these headlines given what is going on in the United States and around the world. If you're in the workforce, you're going to want to watch this episode. I consume news like coffee. It's like a drug. Indeed, I like to read the news while I drink coffee. And I was reading some of the headlines and I nearly sent coffee spewing out of my nose. So let me show you some of these headlines. CNBC is reporting today that Delta CEO says 8,000 employees have tested positive for COVID in the last 4 weeks. The LA Times reported today that California tells COVID positive medical workers to stay on the job. Quote, "We are increasing risk tolerance," unquote. Oregon hospitals allow COVID positive employees to return to work. This is freaking nuts. I mean, absolutely insane. If people are in the hospital, they're there because they aren't well. It's not a spa. I mean, really not well. Like they can't stay at home because they are in danger if they don't go to the hospital, or their condition is such that they absolutely need the care being provided. It's not a spa day. It's not an opportunity to go on a little vacay. Their immune systems are fighting to keep them alive. And the hospital is exposing them to staph with COVID. I mean, really? Are we really doing this? Is this really happening in the United States? I often felt during the Trump years like the world was upside down. But speaking as a lawyer, this is absolutely 100% irresponsible and freaking downright dangerous. Now, over time, you're going to get to know me really well. Hopefully, you'll view me as part of your Thursday ritual. So the way you get to know people and I say as an aside, it's really hard to make friends in Los Angeles, and it's really, really hard to make friends in Los Angeles during a pandemic. So I consider all of you my friends. But the way that you get to know people is that you share. So I'm going to share. I have surgery next week. It's not the kind that will, if I don't get it, that I'll immediately die. So it's technically elective, but I need it. It's necessary. Someday I'll tell you that story, but for now, just understand it's necessary. It's supposed to be outpatient. Though, you know, in October, when they said that the procedure then was outpatient, I ended up in the ICU for a couple of days. So I am remaining open to all possibilities. I no longer take anything as given. While I was there, I had one really great nurse and several terrible ones. One of the most terrible ones, I'll mention her name quietly. Her name was Valerie. And at one point, as she was letting me know she was trying to get pregnant for whatever reason, it occurred to me that I might ask if she was vaccinated, because what she was sharing just made me a little uncomfortable. She said she was. So I believed her, and I believe that she was vaccinated. Now I'm going to share a little bit more. Me sharing. I have asthma. I developed it as an adult. It sucks. I also happen to be immune compromised, in that some components of my immune system don't work as well as other people's. Lucky me. Doctors call me a zebra. For me to get COVID would place me at high risk of being intubated. And I don't think I look good with a tube stuck down my throat. And I kind of like to talk a lot. And I don't know, I'm a fairly miserable patient. So I have taken great pains to stay safe. I don't leave my house except absolutely necessary. My partner does all of the running for us because he is less at risk. And I do my darndest to make sure that I am doing everything possible. I mean, at the early stages, I made my husband wash everything because we weren't getting a straight story from the administration at the time. And I'll tell you, when the first information about this stuff came out and they said it was droplets, I looked at my husband and I said, it's not droplets, it's aerosolized, watch. Because they were telling us not to buy masks, right? Well, turns out it was aerosolized. So I am really sort of careful. I'm one of those people that, you know, washes their hands constantly, especially if I touch something that like might kill me. Like I'm really, really careful. Have anxiety about stuff like that. So my asthma and my being immune compromised, both of these conditions are disabilities. So next week, when I go to the hospital, I'm wondering, do I have to ask people if they're positive for COVID to keep them away from me? Do I have to ask for an accommodation at the hospital that keeps COVID positive employees away from me? And how is that going to go? I mean, I am going to be unconscious most of the time I'm there. And if you've ever had surgery, you know that the experience is one where people come in and out of your pre-op bay. I mean, the last time I had 3 people asking me to do 3 things simultaneously. It looked like a comical game of Twister, to be quite honest with you. And I almost, lost it at one point. Anyway, as a patient, I'm vulnerable. But employees are vulnerable too. Our guest tonight caught my attention because I read a news article about him. He is a Los Angeles attorney, Attorney James DeSimone, and he recently filed a wrongful death suit. Welcome to Deep Dive with Dr. Tracy, Jim.
Very good to be here, Dr. Tracy. Thank you.
So let's start with you. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about you and what you do?
Well, I'm a civil rights lawyer, been a civil rights lawyer here in the Los Angeles area for over 30 years. So my practice is divided into two main segments. One is the one we're going to talk about tonight, employment law, and how in this case, the employment laws that affect those with disabilities impact individuals who work, and of course these past 2 years, and what responsibilities employers have because of the COVID pandemic to keep their employees safe. My other area is police misconduct. So I've been busy these past couple of years since the pandemic. I never thought working from home I could be busier than when you're going to court more often and going to trial. But in fact, more people have needed our help than ever before over these last couple of years because of the challenges that our whole country is facing in both of those areas.
Our first episode was on law enforcement and use of force. So I'm going to just put you in my Rolodex because I know that we're going to be covering that again. And so we'll definitely bring you back to talk about that issue. But as an employment lawyer, can you tell me a little bit about the range of things that you work on?
Sure. We represent individuals who have been harmed in the workplace, either through harassment or discrimination. And in this case, a large part of discrimination law deals with people with disabilities, requests for accommodations, because those are the types of things that companies always get wrong. You have an individual who needs something in the workplace in order for them to perform their essential job duties. It might be a little special. It might be a little different from other employees. And for some reason, in some circumstances with some companies, they're very resistant to that, even though it would enable a person who would otherwise be a great employee to do their job. So when those companies mess up, when it results in someone getting terminated because the company won't accommodate them, or like the Haywood case, where someone gets injured or ill or sick at work because they're not provided those reasonable accommodations, that's the type of case that we can prosecute under California's Fair Employment and Housing Act, and that forms the basis of a civil rights lawsuit. Because few people know this, but the right to have employment free from harassment and discrimination, that is a declared civil right in the state of California. It should be the declared civil right throughout the country. People should be able to go to the workplace, do their job without fear of being harassed because of their disabilities, their gender, their race, their ethnicity. And yet so often in different situations, it still occurs. And that's why the laws are there to protect individuals like the Haywood family, on whose behalf we recently filed this lawsuit.
Now, we broadcast all across the country and frankly, the world. And so am I right to understand that California has a very comprehensive discrimination law?
Yes, it does. In California, we always proceed under California's Fair Employment and Housing Act. Title VII is the law that governs the country as far as non-discrimination. And it really, in terms of disability law, does have a very, very positive laws in terms of requiring the company and the employees to engage in what's called the interactive process, so that people talk about it. You know, someone has a disability, someone needs help to do their jobs. Well, companies are required not only to provide that accommodation, but to interact, meet with the employee. Hey, what do you need to do your job? How can we help? And then act upon it. So they are there to protect the employees, and it's good policy across the board.
So let me pause for a second and do this disclaimer thing where I say to our audience, you're going to want to check with an employment lawyer in your own jurisdiction if you aren't in the state of California, because laws can differ, and each state has its own similar sort of law when it comes to discrimination and behavior in the workplace. And there's also this federal law. And so you want to make sure that you're getting competent advice from a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction.
Dr. Tracy, if I could, I belong to the National Employment Lawyers Association, and so many times people from different states do ask, hey, can you help me out? I'm in this state. And I always tell them, go to the National Employment Lawyers Association referral page. It's a great resource. All the attorneys who practice across the country in employment law many of them are listed there, and it's a way to find an attorney in your area.
And they are a great organization. I'm actually a member, so that's excellent that you brought that up. Thank you. So when let's sort of take this slowly. So what does it mean? What are the requirements to get an accommodation in the workplace generally? What does the law lay as sort of a requirement?
Well, first you have to have a disability. And in California, disability is defined very broadly. It's a little more stringent under federal law, but essentially it's the same. Whatever medical condition you have has to interfere with a major life function. Honestly, it's a pretty low bar because, say, asthma, well, that's going to interfere with your breathing at times. So that breathing is a major life function, right? So there you go. You don't walk through life thinking I'm a disabled person, perhaps, but in fact, you have a disability that under certain circumstances could require a company to provide accommodations. And then really the employee, while of course you have medical privacy, you don't necessarily have to communicate the nature of your disability, the exact specific diagnosis and so on. You really do need to communicate your need for an accommodation based on a disability. And it's also helpful if you have a doctor who can back that up. But again, not necessarily required where you're talking about common sense precautions like we are in the Haywood case when people have knowledge of what's going on with this pandemic.
So if I have a disability, I tell my employer, hey, I have a disability, I need some help. And so you used a phrase, interactive process. Can you explain what that means?
The interactive process is one that requires communication. There's no, structure in terms of what has to happen for an interactive process. But generally, the courts say, at least you've got to talk, at least. So it could be on the phone, in person, sometimes, of course, these days people communicate through text messages, emails, but it does require the employer and the employee to communicate about those accommodations. If an employee requests the accommodation and the employer just says, no, can't have it, well, that's not exactly interactive now, is it? That's not, interactive requires people to actually engage with each other. And so it really is a good faith way to make sure that the employer is understanding what the employee needs, and the employee understands, sometimes maybe one accommodation can't be given, but there's something else that can be done. And it's really designed to at least achieve that process. Again, at the end of the day, what's the goal? The goal is to have the employee there working, performing the essential job functions of the job. And in so many instances, a reasonable accommodation can allow an employee to do it. So it's great for the employer too, especially now with a workforce that, employers are looking for good people to put into the workplace. And so they're going to have to look at these accommodations in order to get a workforce that is dedicated to the job that they have to do.
So what types of things could be an accommodation for an employee?
Well, generally, they fall into a lot of different categories. I mean, one is your workspace, right? If people have physical limitations, back issues, and so on, sometimes it requires different types of desks or seats or things like that. Monitors, if someone has an eyesight problem. A lot of times the accommodations do involve people who need to take a leave. In other words, if you have a disability, you need to take a leave. Sometimes it might be beyond what the company or the law allows in terms of a medical leave. But if they have a disability that's going to require a longer treatment, they're going to come back at a certain deadline. It can't be just extended out forever. That's not necessarily reasonable, but to allow an employee time for a leave to be taken. Now we're seeing with COVID, when individuals who have these vulnerabilities, there are individuals who are, you could say they're uniquely vulnerable, but there's so many across the country who are vulnerable towards, COVID's kind of the roulette disease, right? One person can get it. Oh, no big deal. I got through it. But that's not true for everyone. and hundreds of thousands of people have paid for some of our, being cavalier about this, and especially from the top with the administration that was in place in 2020, and they've paid for it with their lives. So it's important in those instances that, that there are accommodations that are made, such as if an individual can do their work remotely, and we've seen that people can perform their job remotely, and it's not an undue hardship on the company. And that's another sort of term of art, undue hardship, if the company can say, we're not going to provide an accommodation because it causes us an undue hardship, and they have to show what that is. But in so many instances where employees can do their job remotely and protect themselves from the worst ravages of COVID, then we contend, and I think it's consistent with the law, that the companies do have the legal obligation to allow that remote work for individuals who are disabled, because it could allow them to do their job and save their lives.
So does the employer have to defer to the medical provider if the medical provider makes a recommendation?
No, not necessarily. Again, the employer has to at least go through the process and engage in that interactive process to determine whether they could provide the requested accommodation. Is there a job available within the company that the employee could do that meets with those specifications? But again, the burden on the employer not to provide that accommodation is to say, this would cause an undue hardship. And when you're dealing with larger companies and so on, let's say it's going to cost the company a little extra money to do that, to provide that monitor, to allow someone to work remotely, whatever it is. Well, the fact that it costs a little more isn't an undue hardship for most corporations or government entities. So it can't be like, well, this is inconvenient. I mean, a lot of times these accommodations are inconvenient for the employer. That's not an excuse not to give it to the employee.
Over the years, given the experience that you have, can you give us some examples of what might be an undue burden?
Well, if a person is let's say, this is kind of an easy example, but let's say a person works in a supermarket and they're a cashier. Well, you can't be a cashier from home, right? You can't work. So there are jobs, of course, that people do have to show up. The medical profession, people have to show up. There's no question about it. So someone requesting to work remotely for a job that just can't be done, that would be an undue hardship for them to do so. But generally speaking, when you're talking about requests for leaves and requests to work remotely, in office types of jobs, the companies really can't show that there's an undue hardship, because there are usually ways to work it out to both parties' benefit.
Now, let's say your employer denies your accommodation. What are your options then?
Well, I always think it's important to put things into writing. So many times when people come to our office, they've made these requests, but they're verbal requests, and and so not to say that testimony, it surprises people. Yes, testimony is evidence, right? So people going into court, them saying that this happens, that's evidence. A lot of people have been wrongfully convicted and go to jail because someone came into court and said he's the one that did it. It turns out to be the wrong person, right? But somehow when we're dealing with employees, we need something more, in most cases, to prove our case. So if the company is giving you a hard time as an employee, you want to take your time and put what you're requesting in writing, what's occurred in writing, but you really want to do it in a way that, one, emphasizes how much you value your job, two, emphasize that this is the way that you can be a productive employee for the company, and that's your goal, to be a productive employee. Three, write it and then don't send those emails right away. Read the email first. So many times in my cases, people are just, the emails, it's dangerous on both sides, but people, they get something, they respond, and they send something off, and it's not said in a way that's going to make people want to think, oh, I'd want that person as my employee. Write your email as if it's going to be read aloud in court one day, because it very well may be. And so you want to give yourself that little bit of time to cool off if something's been denied, and make sure that you're expressing yourself in a way that shows what you really are as a person, who's somebody who wants to come in and do their job for the company and just needs a little help because of a disability. So putting it in writing is always important, but what you put in writing is equally important, giving it thought. And if you can, have somebody else review it. And if you really can, have an attorney review it.
So I want to make a note here that I can't curse in my emails to my employer, or I shouldn't. So let me ask you a question, because you caught my attention because of COVID and the tie-in here to the work that you do. And so can you tell us a little bit about this case that caught my attention? And we'll go from there.
Sure. We represent the family of Michael Haywood. We represent his family because Michael died on February 2nd, 2021, after a bout with COVID. Michael was an equipment parts supervisor for the County of Riverside, 15 years, an exemplary employee who had pre-existing conditions, hypertension. He used an inhaler at work. He was a twice over cancer survivor. And his wife, who was a social worker, she has an autoimmune conditions, which he was very concerned about her. He was actually more concerned about what could happen to his wife than himself. And so he, at a point in time in December of 2020, when things were getting worse and people were getting positive with COVID in the workplace again, he requested the ability to work remotely, which he had shown that he could do, because they were a couple times during the pandemic in which he was allowed to work from home. So he was fully set up to work from home. There hadn't been any problems. And he knew that he would have to come in about once every 2 weeks. And he asked for a staggered schedule then so that he could come in and not be working in the vicinity of other unmasked people, because he said and would tell his wife, nobody's wearing masks. They're, even though we were required to wear masks in the office at that point under California law, people weren't following that. And so in December of 2020, December 17th, 2020, he caught COVID. And by December 25th, on Christmas Day, he was hospitalized. And as I said, he had a somewhat long battle, couple months battle in the hospital with COVID and succumbed to it on February 2nd. So traditionally, when people are looking at these cases, and early on in the pandemic, I had some potential clients come to me, and if someone gets injured or sick at work, it's usually a workers' compensation case, and it goes through workers' compensation because under the labor code, if you get hurt at work, it's a workers' comp case. You can't sue the employer for negligence, and there's limitations on what you can recover at workers' compensation. But in this particular case, the reason why we feel confident that we will be successful for the Haywood family is because Michael Haywood had a disability, and he communicated, and there's also laws that protect associational disabilities, and he communicated his concern about his wife, who also had a disability that made them each vulnerable to COVID and the worst of those effects, that for them, they felt this would be a matter of life and death. They fit into that category. This is not going to be just like a cold. This could really harm them. And when he asked for those accommodations and communicated it's because of his medical condition, December 2020, he was denied by his supervisors. They said no, and they forced him into work. A coworker got COVID. They've actually admitted that through contact tracing that he caught COVID at work. So that's a big hurdle to overcome because, of course, it's hard sometimes for people to know exactly how they got COVID because it's so prevalent, especially right now, but it has been in different circumstances since March of 2020 or February of 2020. And so we have that aspect of it done. And then under California law, if he's requesting reasonable accommodations and the employer, the County of Riverside, says, no, we're not going to give you those accommodations, and as a result of their refusal to provide those accommodations, he gets sick. He caught COVID at work. If he's working from home, he's not going to catch COVID, right? He's working in an office where people aren't wearing masks, and COVID is rampant throughout the county at this point. He catches it at work. Their failure to provide reasonable accommodations means that we could have a cause of action under the Fair Employment and Housing Act, California's Fair Employment and Housing Act, and also a wrongful death cause of action on behalf of both the wife of Michael Haywood. Michael Haywood has 4 children, 11 grandchildren. He was 61 years old at the time of his death. He loved those grandchildren, spent time with them. The pictures, the videos, they're so touching. He's just really described as such of the salt of the earth type of guy, doing things with his kids, his grandkids. He was, the frustrating part about this, the heartbreaking thing for the family, and there's one other aspect to this case. Elizabeth Haywood caught COVID too. And I don't know in representing her what's worse, because she has long haul COVID. She is in this simultaneously hell for her of being completely heartbroken over losing her husband and then having brain fog and panic attacks and difficulty breathing because of her contracting COVID from him. So it's really just, it's an extremely sad situation when you look at a couple things. One, we're just a couple months away from the vaccine. I mean, so Michael Haywood would have had the ability, given his disability and his age, to get the COVID vaccine in February of 2020 and to eventually have protections. Vaccine probably would have saved his life. And he was a few years away from retirement. And he had some great plans for retirement, buying a camper, he and his wife traveling all over the country, seeing their kids. I mean, Elizabeth's so heartbroken because he will never get to realize that dream. All those years of working hard, and you build to something to have all that time to spend with your family, and then it just gets taken away from you unfairly.
Now, you mentioned that employers get this process wrong a lot. Do you have any, and I'm not asking you to comment necessarily specifically on this employer, but just generally, why did they get it wrong?
Because I think there's some sort of view of if the person's not here, if a person needs a leave, they're a leave of absence because of a medical condition, or a person gets special treatment in the workplace that others don't get. There's just, it's kind of petty in a way, because the person is getting that special, if you want to call it special treatment, or that reasonable accommodation because of their disability, to kind of make things equal for them to work in the workplace. And yet there can be times that there's resentment, and there can be times where, I mean, especially when it's dealing with medical leave, where, look, as an employer, I run an office. As an employer, you want your people to be there working. And if they're not working, then, the people say things. But I think it's one of those things where people have to rise above those sort of, petty, immediate reactions of, where is she? Or where is he? He's not here at work. And really understand that the laws are there to protect all of us, because anyone can be disabled at some point in their life. So while at one point you might say, oh, that's not fair, they're getting this and I don't get it, we really need to take a broader view and look out for one another. And disability laws, which were signed in on the federal level by Republican George Bush, and everyone heralded it, disability laws really are designed to level the playing field for individuals with disabilities and allow them to thrive in the workplace. So it really should be seen as a good thing. But unfortunately, people take it as a burden to them, even when it's not much of one. And they just don't follow the law in their treatment of their employees all the time.
I think a lot of people don't know that President Bush signed the Americans with Disability Act into law, and that was a time when our government was working together.
Yes, there was a time when our government worked together more. It really is, well, that could be a whole other topic. But to see the dysfunction in our government, where you really have, one political party that really seems to just want to stop the other political party from doing anything productive as a matter of, their own view, instead of really trying to look at what's good for the American people. That's what we elect our leaders to do what's good for the American people. And it's really a shame, and it's harming us all that it's gotten so much away from that.
You know, hearing this story about Mr. Haywood and his wife, I just, it is heartbreaking because I mean, let me ask you this. There was a declared state of emergency in the state of California, and for a time there was a requirement that people, you know, safer at home, work from home if you could. Obviously, as cashier, you can't. But does the fact that we were in a declared state of emergency have any impact on this case?
I think absolutely. We've put that in our lawsuit. I think that the fact that Governor Newsom did have a declared state of emergency as of December of 2020, I mean, that it does show that this was a reasonable request for accommodation. This wasn't something outside of what was expected during that period of time. And the, you know, let's face it, just, you know, if we can go back and remember to December of 2020, what we were facing, most people didn't have the opportunity to get a vaccine at that point. They were just rolling them out, right? So we all felt vulnerable. And by December of 2020, over 300,000 Americans had died. But that was the deadliest and most infectious month in the pandemic to date. And it was all over the news. So at that point in time, when you have those executive orders telling employers, if you can have your employees work from home, let them. You should be doing it. And where you have mandatory policies, if you're not working from home, at least make sure that they're wearing masks when they're working in close proximity with each other. It really is just callous indifference for the county of Riverside not to have provided that reasonable accommodation to Michael Haywood in December of 2020, given all of those factors.
Do you think that this case is going to open more doors for COVID lawsuits against employers?
I think so. I haven't seen a lot of it. I know that a lot of these cases being filed necessarily. We don't always know what's going on, but I know early on in the COVID pandemic, I wrote an article which was published in a couple places, and basically setting forth that companies did have this obligation to reasonably accommodate their disabled employees, and then if they didn't do so, it could open them up to liability under the Fair Employment and Housing Act. And I thought there'd be kind of perhaps a rash of cases that would involve just what happened to Michael Haywood. I mean, hoping not. We've talked about this before, Dr. Tracy. Like, as lawyers, we people come to us when the most horrible thing has happened. Sometimes, in this case, it's as bad as it gets, the death of a loved one. So, they're not only cases for us. When I take on a case, you get to know your clients, and you feel their pain sometimes to some degree. I mean, obviously not as deeply as they do, but I did think that there would be more of them. But I think that what happened was that people were just like, okay, oh, COVID, oh, that's workers' comp, let's put it in this box. And no one was really thinking along these lines. And but we were. And so when the Haywood family came to us with their story, well, this is a really good case for us to, not only represent the Haywood family, but the reason why we went out with Elizabeth Haywood, with Dustin Haywood, his middle son, and basically announced the filing of the lawsuit on the courthouse steps of the historic Riverside County Courthouse, is because we want people to know their rights. And we want employers to know that you not only, look, it's not only the right thing to do, it's not only common sense to allow people to do their jobs in an environment where they're not at risk of death, but it's the law. And if common sense and doing the right thing isn't enough for you, well, maybe the law will convince you, because, sometimes when people are facing liability, then that does the right thing. They do the right thing. And that's why, as an attorney who's been doing this type of work for years, I can see the good for society that put in a little plug for attorneys here, that attorneys who represent people can actually do, because they make people do the right thing when they might not otherwise do so.
But do you, at the same time, I mean, I'm a cynical lawyer at this point in my life, and sometimes I can't help but be that. And I mean, it seems like large employers have, they just pay nuisance value, what I would call nuisance value, which is sort of, the cost of defense. They sort of budget it in as part of their yearly budget, and they just go about doing whatever they want, and they don't seem to change. I mean, is that an overly cynical view, or are there pockets of employers out there that, frankly, there's nothing that you can do that's going to make them change their behavior?
Well, I think it's a realistic view. I think you're right. I do think that that's why we try to take it up the chain of command. When I talk about writing those letters, if you're not getting satisfaction in people who are immediate supervisors, make sure you go to human resources. You don't want to CC 20 people on an email. Companies don't like that, right? I've seen that backfire a little bit, but at least go up the chain of command. Because if you go up to the chain of command and you go to individuals who are called, basically, managing agents of the company or directors, that's where you can hold companies liable for punitive damages. And so, the nuisance value and in terms of what they're willing to pay for settlement, but that's why it's also important for people who are looking for lawyers to get lawyers who are trial lawyers. We're trial lawyers. If we're offered nuisance value, we're not going to accept it for our clients. If we have a case that we can win, we're going to go to trial. And you need to have a lawyer who's willing to go to bat for you and go to trial if necessary. I mean, sometimes settlement is best for all parties. But if you need to do that, and that's where the company's exposure on punitive damages. I mean, here in California, there's been a couple of huge ones, against companies where you've have, 130 million, 150 million in punitive damages. Well, I don't care how big a company is, that's not exactly nuisance value for anybody. So we're trying to keep them honest.
Do you see that do you think, being realistic, that employers are going to sort of go back to their old ways? Or do you think, given the prevalence of long COVID and how long this pandemic has stuck around, and I mean, today was opinion day at the Supreme Court, and I got to say, as an aside here, that they prevented OSHA from they prevented the Biden administration from being able to go forward with their mandate, but they won't stop a law in Texas that prohibits abortion at 15 weeks. I'm just going to leave that there for folks who know me. But that given the fact that I saw the numbers, it's like 45,000 or something, cases a day in Los Angeles County. I mean, it's outrageous. Given the fact that this is such a serious problem, that it's become a pandemic of the unvaccinated, that and as I read the headlines earlier, that health workers are now being forced to go to work positive because of the staff shortages. And it's not too long that we're going to see grocery store workers doing it as well. Do you think that employers are going to come to heel, and they're going to do the right thing when it comes to accommodating, or do you think they're going to go back to the way things were before COVID?
Well, boy, hopefully we're going to get to that date of where we could say, oh, it's after COVID, right? Because this may be with us for a long time. We just don't know. But in answer to your question, let's face it. Corporations, they claim to be people, and the United States Supreme Court has said that they're people, but yet they do behave differently depending on who's in charge. So I think companies that are forward thinking, companies that care about their employees, companies that want to attract the best in talent will develop the flexibility necessary to retain good people and allow them to work in a safe work environment. And companies that are more rigid and don't allow for that are going to have a harder time attracting the best talent. I think that we've all learned different ways to accomplish what we need to accomplish. in terms of our jobs, and employers have to go along with the times. I mean, so I would hope that those accommodations will still be available to folks no matter what the level of threat is. But let's face it, right now, and when this interview is taking place, January of 2022, when, as you said, it's in terms of the number of infections and it's worse than ever. Companies they have to take a look at this and try to make sure that they're not causing more to die. I mean, you have today's Supreme Court decision, which basically said, okay, we're not going to allow for OSHA, the agency that is set up to protect workers and the safety of workers. We're not going to allow OSHA to regulate things, to make things safe for employees in the workplace. But businesses, you can do it if you want to, so it's like, okay, so they're somehow trusting businesses to do the right thing vis-a-vis their employee safety, when we know traditionally that hasn't been the case. Now, and the laws are on the books. I mean, not that I was surprised at this Supreme Court's decision. I mean, let's face it, you basically had politics that came into play, and because of the political leanings of our Supreme Court justices, have basically put thousands of more Americans at risk of dying. And it's tragic in its own right. But that being said, we have to live with what's going on, and companies have to realize that they have that responsibility. And I'm hoping that with the lawsuit on behalf of the Haywood family, that it does attract that national attention, and does have employees look at, oh, wait a minute, we could be liable for his death. Oh, wait a minute, we could be liable for his wife's COVID. And so at least it gets them maybe thinking about that when they make those decisions as to whether or not to reasonably accommodate or mandate masks in the workplace. And now, it's the type of masks they're looking at, to actually make sure that people are wearing masks that provide the maximum amount of safety in the workplace, so that people don't become ill, and the worst case scenarios don't happen with their families.
Now, I had this experience of becoming, having this disability later in life, and obviously being a lawyer, I'm forward, I speak out, right? But I think that the average employee might be afraid of getting fired if they were to ask for this help that the law allows them. Is that something that they should worry about?
Well,
are they protected?
They are protected. If there's an underlying disability, I think folks have a better protection. So I think couching it in terms of, I have a disability, I'm requesting this as a reasonable accommodation, does serve to protect them. And then if the worst case scenario happens, well, it's not the worst case scenario. It's not worse than dying. But if they do get fired from their job because of that, then I or other lawyers in my position, if you've got that paper trail, it's much easier for us to take a case on. Because I know it's hard for folks to find lawyers. We're not able to take on every case where people are coming to us. So, but I do think that look, I mean, if the flip side of the coin is that you're risking your life, or you're risking the lives of family members who are vulnerable, then it's better to do the right thing and to write that request, and to get a doctor to back up that request, and to put things politely in writing to the powers that be within a company. And the other thing is there is a worker shortage out there. So if you're good at your job, and that company is not the place for you because they're not providing safety precautions that are literally life-saving, there are other employers who are probably looking for good employees right now, because there is a shortage of dedicated employees for a lot of important jobs out there in the United States.
So as long as an employee is making a good faith request for an accommodation on a legitimate disability, it's protected activity, and people can do whatever. I used to say to my clients, look, anybody can do whatever they want. It's whether they're going to be held responsible for it, or whether they're going to, or whether they're going to skirt it. and that's really what the issue is. But should employees be asserting themselves and trying to get their accommodations?
Well, I think so. I mean, especially if they're in a situation where it's where it's life threatening for them. I mean, but the other thing I would have to say is, you said it was a pandemic of the unvaccinated. It's a little confusing now because so many people who are vaccinated are positive with COVID, but people who are vaccinated don't end up in necessarily usually in the hospital or dying, and we're in the worst situation. So, one thing that people are going to have to take a look at, and this is, someone asked me today, well, what happens if someone just is like not vaccinated and they're requesting those types of accommodations? And, then you're going to have to weigh it because, there is a division in this country, and maybe people who end up on your jury think, oh, wow, you're requesting that you didn't get vaccinated. Well, you're going to end up alienating folks on the other side who, are thinking we all have to take personal responsibility here. And, it seems as if the science is there that the personal responsibility includes being vaccinated ourselves, both for our own safety and for the safety of our loved ones around us. So, I have people I love very dearly who have made a decision not to get vaccinated. So I tread lightly on this subject sometimes. But on the other hand, from where I'm sitting, especially as this pandemic rages on, it seems like it's the prudent thing to do for employees and everyone to get vaccinated. And that's something to also look at when you're considering your options as to how you're going to engage the company.
Thank you for sharing this terribly tragic story of Mr. Haywood and his wife. And I hope that our viewers learned a lot from you. I know that it's daunting to talk to an attorney, and the more information we put out there, the better. And so, Jim DeSimone, thank you very much for being here, and I very much appreciate it.
Dr. Tracy, my pleasure. It's very good to be part of this show, and I appreciate you getting this information out there to people. It's important. Thank you.
We're going to have you back.
I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Folks, get vaccinated. Okay? Get vaccinated. Wear a mask. Don't put yourself at risk. Don't put your colleagues at risk. Don't put your family at risk. Don't put your friends at risk. I'm sick and tired of the disinformation. I am sick and tired of people saying, well, that vaccine really worked. The vaccine does work. In most cases, it's going to keep you from dying. And, it is so tragic, this case with the Haywoods. And the reason for that is because this is a man who obviously was a hard worker, and he's from a generation where, he was loyal. He was a loyal employee. And, I can't imagine why, the accommodation wasn't granted. And I know that, from talking with Jim, that there's a lot of discovery to do on this case still. It's very early in the process. And so there's so much to learn. But I take the responsibility of being the host of this show very seriously. And I am encouraging all of you to, if you need an accommodation at work, ask for it. Assert your rights. They're your rights. That's why you have them. That's why President Bush signed into law the ADA. That's why California, if you live in California, has such a comprehensive law that protects folks with disabilities. And these laws are throughout the country. Some of them are better than others. But you have a federal right as well under the Civil Rights Act or rather under the ADA, and also you have a right against being discriminated against under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So, people should feel that they can work, that they can participate in society, and they shouldn't be afraid. Nobody should be afraid at work. Nobody should be afraid that they're going to bring something home to their family member. And if you own a business and you're an employer, please do the right thing. These people are human beings. They spend most of their day trying to assist you. And, you have an obligation to them to take care of them. We've turned into a society where employees get tossed away, that they can just get thrown away. Unless you're a member of a union, you are replaceable and very easily. And so, I ask that you sort of follow the platinum rule. I hear people mention the golden rule, which is, treat people how you want to be treated. I like to operate by treat people better than you want to be treated. It is tragic. When someone dies of COVID, they die alone with some stranger holding their hand, especially in December of 2020. When all of this was going down, people were watching their loved ones die over iPads with strangers, hoping that they could hear them. There's nothing worse than dying alone. I can't imagine what that family went through. And I am so grateful for lawyers to take these cases. So if you're a lawyer, good for you if you take these cases. I wish I were still practicing, but life took me in a different direction. But I'm grateful that there are lawyers out there fighting the fight for employees, because they're vulnerable. And again, get vaccinated, wear a mask, stop this nonsense. Okay, really stop it. This is beyond serious at this point. We've got doctors and nurses being told to go to work being COVID positive. I don't know about you, but as I said, I don't want any of those people leaning over me, breathing on me. It's just heart-wrenching that so many lives have been lost in this country for COVID. It is so heart-wrenching. Today I had the opportunity to participate in some debates. And I gotta say that that this issue of vaccination is one that prior generations had no problem with. They didn't. They got in line, they took their sugar cube, and they rolled up their sleeve, and that allowed our generation to be here, to be walking, to not be sick, and we've let them down by failing to get vaccinated and failing to do the things that need to be done. Science is advanced so that we can get these things done quickly. We have better technology. We have more knowledge. Things happen faster. Just look at the technology of computers these days, and just the advances that we make happen faster. And these conspiracy theories, are exactly that. People who have died of COVID who were anti-vax regretted not getting that vaccine. There are plenty of videos and plenty of pleas on behalf of families that have lost those loved ones. Unfortunately, for Jim's client, the vaccine wasn't available. But I can imagine that he would have taken it. And he would have taken it so that he would have been safe. He beat cancer twice, but he got killed by COVID because he caught it at work. Tonight was a great show, and I really appreciate Jim's participation in it. I hope you learned a lot. My goal here is to make sure that we dive deeper and we turn that knowledge meter, we turn that needle on the knowledge meter to more. And I hope that that's what happened for you tonight. And that's my goal in the future, is to make sure that we keep adding to the knowledge out there that the other networks aren't doing, that we aren't getting the detail on a daily basis of the things that we really need to know in order to be good citizens and to be protected. So with that, I want to say Tuesday, I expect you all to be watching the Power Hour talk panel at 6:30 Pacific, 9:30 Central, where Mel Andre, herds cats, a great group of us. And while we don't agree on anything, the one thing we do agree about is that we respect each other enough to listen to each other. And I will see you next Thursday. Everything going okay at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here for Deep Dive with Dr. Tracy. On behalf of all of my colleagues here at ENSL TV, good night.